China elects a president, but it's all a lie. And how Canada is addressing China's election interference by burying it even deeper. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. You probably know that companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never heard of, and you have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps stop them. I'll explain more at the end. So, good news for Xi Jinping. He's been elected president for a third term. I'm saying all those things in quotes because really, they're all based on lies. But first, you should know that this week, the Chinese government held what's called the Two Sessions. It's an annual meeting of two groups. One is the National People's Congress, or NPC. It's China's rubber stamp Congress that passes whatever laws the Communist Party has told them to pass. And two is the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC. Which is worse than a rubber stamp because it doesn't even have ink. The CPPCC is a group made up of well-connected elites from social circles, private business, academia, etc. In theory, they can make policy suggestions, but they had better not suggest anything that goes against the party line. The whole point is to control China's elite by giving them prestige instead of intellectual freedom. Now, the important thing about the Two Sessions is that it shows what the Chinese Communist Party intends to do. First, they elected Xi Jinping for a third term as president today. Okay, I actually recorded this video yesterday before the vote, but I am 100% confident that he'll be reelected because president is a fake title. It's meant to dupe the West into thinking China is a normal country with a normal government, when in fact, the entire Chinese government is under the authority of the Communist Party. Xi Jinping's higher titles are General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party and Head of the Military. He secured both of those positions for a third time last October. And there are no true elections in China. NPC members are told how to vote. And they all voted for Xi Jinping. Or possibly one or two of them were told to vote against Xi because that makes it look like a democracy. But it's not really a third term either. Terms are another illusion to make it seem like China has a normal government. Communist leaders don't rule because of rules. They rule through power struggle. Xi Jinping will keep getting more and more so-called terms every 5 years until he dies or gets ousted in a power struggle. So to sum it up, Xi Jinping has been fake elected to a fake term as China's fake president. Congratulations. One useful thing we can learn from the Two Sessions, though, is what the Communist Party intends to do over the next year plus. And surprise, China is implementing reforms that will deepen Xi Jinping's control. In particular, they will set up two powerful new regulators. One is for consolidating most of China's piecemeal financial regulators into one giant agency that will report directly to the State Council. This new financial super regulator is meant to rein in China's big public and private banks, plus smaller local financial institutions, as well as the real estate sector. The goal is to make sure they can't find loopholes and take on more debt than they can handle, which is important because China is facing serious crises in both real estate and banking. The bank protests last year were just the tip of the iceberg. And if anything will fix China's financial crises, surely it's more state control. The other new Chinese regulator will be for data governance. It will centralize the management of the country's vast stores of data. This is another super regulator. It will consolidate a bunch of other tech-related agencies which had been setting rules on data collection. We don't know exactly what it will do yet, but let me give some examples of what it could do, based on the direction things have been going with big data in China. My guess is the new super regulator will create rules that will force private companies like smartphone apps and social media to share data directly with a single government agency. So authorities can find out where Chinese citizens are and what they're up to all the time, efficiently without having to comb through lots of different servers. Another guess is that they'll regulate how foreign companies can get data out of China and what they'll need to share with Chinese authorities. For example, if you drive a Tesla in China, maybe your location and camera data will now be shared with the Public Security Bureau in Beijing, but not necessarily with Tesla headquarters in Texas, because footage from Beijing might be considered a state secret. Again, those are just educated guesses, but nothing screams Big Brother like all of your data being watched by a single powerful authority. Both of these two new super regulators will report directly to China's State Council, the top body within the Chinese government. And Xi Jinping has just replaced the State Council's top guy, the Chinese premier. The new premier is Li Qiang. He replaces the old premier, Li Keqiang. I assume the appointment of this new premier is meant to show that whenever you think there's going to be true reform in China, everything stays almost exactly the same. And after the break, when it comes to CCP interference, Justin Trudeau will be investigating himself. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Canada has ordered an investigation into alleged election interference, including from China. I covered this topic in depth earlier this month. In that episode, I showed you proof that the Chinese Communist Party has agents interfering with Canada's elections, including helping people from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's party get elected in 2019 and 2021. And I show how Trudeau tried to keep it all quiet. Link is below. We also did a great interview with Canadian investigative journalist Terry Glavin on her podcast, China Unscripted. He showed us just how deep this interference goes. Link for that is also below. In fact, Chinese Canadians have been reporting Chinese interference in Canada since at least 2006, but they were always ignored. Until now, it seems. So here's what's new this week. Facing public pressure, Justin Trudeau has said he will appoint a special investigator to look into it. On Monday, Trudeau gave a 45-minute public speech about the issue of foreign interference.
We have long known, and an independent report confirmed it again last week, that the Chinese government and other regimes like Iran and Russia have attempted to interfere not just in our democracy, but in our country in general, whether it's our institutions, our businesses, our research facilities, or in the daily lives of our citizens.
Which sounds on the surface like he's taking it seriously, and is even taking the larger issue seriously. The special investigator he appoints will not only be looking into China, or only election interference, they'll be looking into interference in general, from any and all hostile countries. And that's precisely the problem. Because the main issue is China. The main threat to Canada's elections is China. Not Russia, certainly not Iran. But the Trudeau government will bog down the special investigator with having to look into everything, everywhere, all at once. And in doing so, it'll muddy the waters so much it'll take years, if ever, to get specific clarity on China's role in Canadian elections. And by then, even future elections will have already come and gone. So by expanding the scope of the investigation, Trudeau is effectively shutting it down. Very clever. It should be telling that in his entire 45-minute speech about interference, he only mentioned China 4 times. So if you, as a Canadian, want to get to the bottom of the Chinese Communist Party's interference in Canada, don't put your hopes on Justin Trudeau promising to investigate himself. Now, some Americans also want to get to the bottom of the Chinese Communist Party's interference in the U.S., and that's why Republican Congressman Lance Gooden is calling to reestablish the Department of Justice's China Initiative. The DOJ had created the China Initiative in 2018 because about 80% of all economic espionage prosecutions brought by the DOJ were related to China. In other words, the DOJ in 2018, under President Trump, recognized that the main threat was China. But in 2022, the Biden administration shut down the program. It was over perceptions that it unfairly painted Chinese Americans as disloyal. Look, I get that there are fears about racism, but that's a bit unfair, because people of all races are happy to sell out to China in exchange for personal gain, like that white Harvard professor who was convicted for secretly helping recruit top scientists for China, and like so many white billionaires who sacrificed their morals to do business in China. If 80% of all economic espionage in the US is related to the Chinese state, it's not racist to call it out. Look, the Chinese Communist Party didn't stop its espionage just because America got a new president who's more sensitive to racism. That's why Congressman Gooden wants to reestablish the China Initiative. But Gooden caused a bit of a media scandal last week when he called out Chinese-American Congresswoman Judy Chu for being either compromised or incompetent. She hit back, calling his remarks racist. What actually happened was, last week, Gooden suggested that Chu should not receive access to sensitive classified materials because she defended Dominic Ng, who President Biden appointed to lead U.S. trade interests in Asia. Ng has been accused of having ties to the Chinese Communist Party, prompting a group of House GOP lawmakers to ask the FBI to investigate the appointee. So his comment was not about Judy Chu being ethnically Chinese. It was about her defending someone who potentially has ties to the CCP. But still, Gooden made a political mistake, because his comments have prompted the media to focus on racism instead of the real issue, which is the CCP's interference in American democracy, which is exactly why the Biden administration shut down the China Initiative in the first place. So the CCP doesn't always need to interfere with American politicians. Sometimes they're happy to interfere with each other. If only America could be ruled by a strong leader who could stay in power forever with a Congress that all voted the same way and never argued. And this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Whenever you do anything online or use apps on your phone, there's a huge number of companies that collect your personal data. When I signed up for Incogni a year ago, I discovered there were dozens of data brokers that potentially had my private information without my permission. And these companies can get hacked, spreading my private information even more widely. For example, last year, a hacker stole user data from 5.4 million Twitter accounts, which included users' phone numbers and email addresses. And that hacker put this user data up for sale on the web for $30 grand. And if Twitter can be hacked, so can all the smaller companies that buy and sell your data. So what can you do? Get as many companies as possible to delete your data off the internet. And that's what Incogni does for you. Incogni has already gotten my details removed from 102 of these sketchy data brokers, with a lot more in progress. And I didn't have to do anything after signing up. Incogni just handles it. So I recommend you get Incogni for yourself. Click the link below or go to incogni.com/uncensored. For a limited time, the first 100 people to use the code uncensored will get 60% off. Get your personal data off the market with Incogni. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.